The boats you see on the screen are old decommissioned warships. The coast that you are looking at is off the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Don't let their small appearance fool you. This is shot from a great distance away. Up close, those warships are massive. The most destructive conflict in human history ended with 2 atomic explosions similar to the one you have just watched. They were among the first of the most dangerous and devastating tool human beings have ever created. World War II finally ended when the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When they detonated, an estimated 110,000 people were killed in an instant that continues to haunt the annals of human history. When we study conflict, we tend to read a lot of really big numbers. It is important to add some perspective, considering especially that these numbers refer to human people, each who had a whole life happening before their eyes, before it was taken away. The atomic bombs that destroyed the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki inflicted a combined death toll of 68 times the entire population of your school. And that is just the death toll of the 2 bombings that ended the war. In this unit, we will be delving into a dark period of human history, a period now labelled as World War II. Pause for a moment and reflect on the name. Consider for a second the absurdity that a human conflict that came to encompass the entire Earth happened not just once, but twice. Estimations of the final death toll of this second conflict vary, but some estimates range as high as 85 million people dying as a direct result of the war. World War II is the struggle for supremacy between nations and the supremacy of ideas. The victors, the side on which our country, Australia, served, is known as the Allied Forces, and chief among their leadership was the Big Three: the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, which was essentially Russia. The other side of this conflict is known as the Axis, which comprised of Japan, the final holdout of the war who experienced the devastation of nuclear warfare firsthand, as well as Italy, and of course, Germany. Spanning between 1939 and 1945, World War II saw what essentially became the last hurrah for colonialism, another shift in the borders of the world, and another monumental leap for the technology of humankind. So, how did it happen? In the previous recorded lesson, we explored the broad strokes of why World War II occurred, by examining the ways the First World War ended. This lesson, we are beginning to delve into how World War II occurred. The story of this lesson begins in the 1920s, colloquially known now as the Roaring Twenties. It became known as such due to the massive economic soaring of the United States of America. People were living so high and so rich, they didn't notice themselves walking right into the Great Depression. If the 20s were hallmarked by wealth and excess, for the Western world at least, the 30s were defined by severe economic turbulence and difficult living conditions. As mentioned in the last recorded lesson, Germany entered a decade of humiliation and hardship following the First World War. The irony is that Germany endured a 20s filled with immense civil unrest, but their outcomes began to improve moving into the 30s during an effort of rebuilding. This 20-year period of time for Germany has become known as the Weimar Republic. So, what is the Weimar Republic? This is the interim government of Germany after the Kaiser's abdication following World War I. Toward the end of the war, the hierarchy of the German military was on the brink of collapse. Many powerful military leaders conspired against their emperor, leading him to renounce the throne for his own safety. The government that formed in the wake of this move was a republic, meaning, for the first time ever, the officials running Germany had to be elected. Before we can continue, we need to understand the attitudes of the time. Political theory and ideology were enduring a massive overhaul as the monarchies of the world ended and power was taken over by career politicians. Most people have at least heard of the term democracy. You may have heard of the term capitalism as well, as many associate those two things as part of the Western ideology. But what is ideology? Think of an ideology as a school of thought for the ways one believes society should work. There are many ideologies in existence, so let's quickly cover only the ones relevant to the topic we're studying. The leading ideology of the Western world, quote unquote, namely the United States, is democracy. Democracy is a political ideology that favors the rule of the majority through so-called free election voting. Capitalism, which many confuse as the political ideology of the USA, is actually an economic ideology, which believes in free market and business. Despite some variations between countries around the world, this model of thinking is what has taken dominance in the world at the time of World War II. What many believe to be the opposite model to democracy and capitalism is communism, which at the time had risen to power in Russia and begun to spread around the world. The ideology of the Nazi Party, as well as the Italian National Fascist Party, was fascism. The core faculties of fascist belief were, and to a large extent still are, authoritarianism, intense nationalism, militarism, and social hierarchy and order. Definitely pause on this screen for a moment and read these definitions. They are very relevant to our unit of learning. The ideology of Japan at the time was imperialism, an ideology that is similar to fascism because it is the school of thought from which fascism was birthed. Imperialism is also much like colonialism and involves the belief in spreading one's influence over other nations and extracting their resources for the empire. For the Weimar Republic, governance became ineffectual due to political infighting by parties who often acted more akin to organized criminal mobs. Multiple times between 1918 and 1933, tyrants attempted to seize power for themselves, and violence was rampant in the form of riots between large groups of political party affiliates, as well as targeted murder. The decimated economy following the war did not help the state of disorder in the government, which quickly became a civil disorder in the streets. Within this great hardship rose a young idealist who had a skill for public speaking. His name is Adolf Hitler. Hitler found solidarity in the National Socialist Party, the Nazi Party. In 1923, Hitler himself even attempted a seizure of power in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The march on the city centre in Munich led to Hitler's arrest, which led to him talking his way out of execution and into prison, which is where he wrote his book Mein Kampf, outlining his ideas of National Socialism, fascism, and race, all of which would later become the foundation of his rule over Germany. After wrangling control of the Nazi Party, and then extending his influence over the then heads of state in Germany, Hitler was made Chancellor, and, in 1934, Führer. His rise to absolute power came at the end of a brutal process where the Nazi Party essentially bullied their way to political prominence and then murdered all of their competition in their sleep, quite literally in this case. The political landscape of the Weimar Republic was a perfect breeding ground for the type of violent extremism that characterized the Nazi Party. While Hitler did do good things for Germany, he often did so at the cost of human life, as he and his fellow Nazi hierarchy of leadership did not shy from killing their perceived enemies. Hitler's actions were also a threat to the rest of Europe. He rebuilt Germany's military capacity in spite of the Treaty of Versailles, and used it to strong-arm control of the Rhineland back from the French, as well as control of Austria and Czechoslovakia from their respective governments. Hitler bullied his way to getting what he wanted because most of Europe was still war-weary after the First World War, and were not keen to rush into a second conflict. And furthermore, most were still recovering after the Great Depression. The final straw snapped in 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland. The leadership in Britain and France, finally realizing that placating Hitler would not stop his ambition, declared war on Germany. In the next recorded lesson, we will delve into the details of World War II. This will include both the European theatre and the fight against fascism in both Italy and especially Germany, as well as the often overlooked Pacific theatre and the brutal struggle against the spread of Japanese imperialism.